Hello, and welcome to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast sponsored by Faith Growth. I'm your host, Charlotte Elia, and on this podcast, we talk to leaders who are out in the world engaging folks through digital ministry. Today, I am delighted to have Tom Trenney with me. Tom serves as Minister of Music to First-Plymouth Congregational Church in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he's also the Assistant Professor of Music and Conductor of Choirs at Nebraska Wesleyan University. Tom, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Tom, tell me what it is like being a music minister right now.
Yeah, wow. One of the things I'm so mindful of is as I've been getting back into the world and being able to visit groups of church musicians in real time, which we sure missed for several years, a couple of years. I'm so mindful of wanting to be sure to say thank you to them, because I know all of those people I'm meeting and those of you who are listening in right now over the last few years have had to learn to do things, or maybe even didn't have time to learn. You just had to do things that you never imagined you were going to have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think that's uncovered or reminded me is the reason we went about doing all that stuff isn't necessarily because we love music. It's because we care about the people that we believe music can engage and inspire and serve and heal. And so to all of you who may be listening in this moment, I want to start with that and to just say, you can't help but give yourself permission not to feel the best you've ever felt about the things that are happening as you're returning to something a little bit more usual, whatever that is, and as sudden as the transition away from our norms was, I think we have to give ourselves permission to realize the return is going to be much more gradual.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're all still finding our way. We're wondering, is it always going to be these 60% of people that are going to be back in the pews again? Is that because the other 40% are satisfied with what they're doing at home, which was the only thing we were able to safely encourage them to do for a few years? Or are they disinterested now all of a sudden as they're thinking about priorities? Or is it some combination of those things? I think one thing I would be sure to say fairly early in our conversation today is that I think we can't evaluate ourselves or judge ourselves in the same way we might have a couple of years ago before we knew what a pandemic was, as we approach a Sunday or a season now. Things are different, and we have to come up with different ways of gauging how we are doing. And I mean that in terms of numerics and statistics, but I also mean that in terms of how are we doing, and how are the people that make this ministry with us, how are they doing? And those may be the most important questions as we move forward.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I wonder, as you are out in the world getting to re-engage your colleagues in music ministry, what you're hearing about how they're actually doing right now.
Well, I think everyone's kind of concerned,
Yeah.
You wonder how long can your church go on in this way, in this kind of in-between way. As I think a lot of us realize, a lot of churches are small enterprises that, most American churches, I think, are less than 100 members, a vast majority probably. And so you wonder if these metrics are indeed real, that, 60 to 70% is a really good turnout now. You have to wonder, can we keep going? And I've heard a lot of people say this hasn't been true here in this rarefied environment I'm in, but I've heard people say in their choirs, that maybe they would have had 15 people in their choir before, and now there are 5 or 6 that are coming every week. And how do you keep going? what do you do? I think people are concerned. And yet, again, if we're thinking about the mission of the music ministry in the church rather than the product of the music ministry in the church, then all of those things are not as important as we used to think they were, and to be honest, they never have been.
Mm-hmm.
We often forgot about those things as we were thinking about building and growing and thriving. And think about what a blessing that was to be in a universe where we didn't have to have those kinds of concerns, and now more of us do. And I think it helps us. It helps me to try to want to be more helpful to people, to help them focus on what the purpose and the calling of this is again, which is something I think have thought is so essential and important, and that can give us the strength to take the next step and figure out where we might be going. So,
how have the last 3 years impacted your understanding of music ministry? Has it changed anything or reinforced certain priorities for you, maybe?
Well, okay, so I serve a church in Lincoln, Nebraska, in the middle of the country. It's lovingly referred to as flyover country, right? Now, who would have ever thought that this church that I serve, that sings hymns and choir music, would have had in the last few years over 10 million people watching videos from our singing those songs?
Mm-hmm.
That's an example of something I never would have imagined would have happened. And I can tell you, if you look, there are these graphs in YouTube land that show you the things that happen. And, we had plenty of people watching and that sort of thing that made us continue to keep sharing things on YouTube. But then came March 2020. And suddenly thousands of people, more were coming in search of hymns. And this underscores what I'm talking about, that when we found ourselves in the midst of the pandemic, it's not that we needed music less for our spiritual enlivenment. It was simply that it wasn't safe to encounter it passive by accident, perhaps, in the churches that we sort of habitually would have attended. Mm-hmm. And so people started to seek out that content, which was, I think, which is a great, what do I want to say, which speaks very well of the things we're all striving to do in our churches, that this was something that was essential to people. And hundreds of churches, literally hundreds of churches, were writing to us and asking, can we use these videos of the hymns from your church in our online services? And what a gift that was to us and to our congregation to know that, this music ministry we were doing in real time was able also to be of a benefit to people at a time when they really needed it, when they really need to sing and to hear "Great is thy faithfulness," and they couldn't do it themselves. What a gift that is. And I think now, with so many of us having these online sorts of experiences, whether they're created solely for an online environment or whether they're streams again now of something that's actually happening with actual people, I'm so glad we're back to that, by the way. But we can guess that, these little drips in the pond that we may offer, whether it's from Lincoln, Nebraska, or whatever corner you may happen to be listening in from right now, we can't imagine what God's going to do with those seeds that are being scattered. And I think we have to trust these songs of faith to know that they're going to be discovered and found. And that's been a real revelation to me of how spiritually valuable these treasured songs have been in this new context. And that's something that makes me more aware of how important it is for us to continue to share these things in that way.
Excellent. I want to talk a little bit more about congregational songs, and you're such a skilled teacher in that. And I actually just watched a video from your YouTube page of you teaching and singing "Lead with Love."
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And lovely. But what other impacts do you think there might be on congregational song in the digital sphere or in this hybrid world? I mean, not everyone. Folks were, and I think continue to be worried about sort of passively ingesting, music now through a live stream rather than participating. And I'm just, what are you thinking around that?
Well, I maybe will answer that sideways and eventually get around to a more.
Love it. Great. Because that's how I ask the question too.
Well, yeah, something that occurred to me when we were creating online experiences, when it was not safe for us to gather people together for worship, in that phase of the pandemic, I had to reframe what we were doing from thinking that what we were doing was actually having a worship service. I think what we were doing was creating a program of words and music and spirit. It was very fabricated though, because there were cameras and no humans experiencing it with us, and so when I started to think that we were creating we could think of it as a very artistic or a very spiritual or a very from the heart ministry piece, but we were creating a piece designed for consumption this way, the way Mr. Rogers would have created his his television programs. We were making a program. We were not, in his case, we were not sitting in the room with the child, and we were not having a worship service, really. It was out of real time. It wasn't in sync. It wasn't in so there's nothing wrong with that, and it's a beautiful thing. The people in the Mormon Tabernacle have been doing that for a long time, and a lot of people have benefited from it.
Sure.
The thing is, a lot of us were falling into doing that and maybe didn't realize it. So, I think there's as wonderful as those things can be, whether there's a choir or a soloist or whatever there might be, they're never going to be the same as when everyone is free to come in. There's an inclusive environment, and when everyone, in whatever way they're capable, is able to share their voice in the beauty of singing, in the collective, beauty of singing. And so I don't think there's any way for things on the computer to help us do that. On the other hand, I think some things can be helpful that we stumbled upon. If we sing hymns online and put the words on the screen, there is a chance that someone might sing along. And that's different, I think, than if they're just being asked to watch a soloist sing a song from whatever worship style it might be, and not really being invited at all to give their voice to that sort of thing. So I think that's part of it. On the other hand, coming back, we did discover, at least in our context, that when people were wearing masks, singing was actually not unsafe as we originally thought it might be. Mm-hmm. I know of some choirs that have had COVID spreads when they've been unmasked. I think we all have heard those stories. And a lot of us now are starting to experience that when we know it's safer, because all of us have been vaccinated and those sorts of things. I'm not trying to make fun of that, but just to say, I think that's going to happen more, just as though colds and things have been spread more. And I'm not trying to minimize COVID either, but just to say it's gotten safer. I think we can all agree for a lot more of us who have had the benefit of these gifts. So we feel very grateful that all the time the congregation did gather and we were masked, we were able to still safely sing together. And so I feel confident about all those things, that we won't be losing the gift of singing together because of COVID any more than we necessarily already were, because of the ways that culture has been shifting away from group singing. I think it's easy to blame some things on COVID that actually already were dissolve. Well, I can't think of the word now, but that were already kind of untangling before it happened. And I would like to ask us not to try to misidentify, those things, because I think we have to be honest. In some cases, I think part of why congregational song has suffered is because in a lot of contexts, the leadership of congregational song has not been effective or particularly intentional or mindful about that role. And I think that over time has created some of the transitions in worship styles that have moved away from group singing, which I don't think, no one can convince me yet, at least, is anachronistic in our time. So
I think there's an opportunity there for folks who are worried about, their choirs aren't back, or their choirs aren't back in the way they want them to be, to, maybe shift some focus in that direction.
Absolutely. And, even if the choir's only role, if it's small group, is to engage somehow a more mindful and intentional congregational song, that's good enough. We should be overjoyed that we can sing anything at all, even if it's not in 18 parts, and standing on its head to be a challenging and difficult musical endeavor. I think we have to remember what it felt like not to get to sing together, and let that tender our hearts to what a joy it is to sing anything, and to be able to invite others to do that with us should be the ultimate privilege, of what we do.
What do you think the greatest challenges are right now, or opportunities, or they're usually the same thing, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think people are reassessing their commitments. I think they're reassessing their patterns and habits. I think a lot of people seem to be a little bit more aware of, spending a little bit more time with my family during those years, though I'm sorry for why it had to happen and the way it had to happen. It was kind of good, and I think we have to hear those things. I know something that I'm doing a lot is thinking about, are there more efficient ways that instead of doing two things, just because we used to do those two things, that they could maybe become one and strengthen each other, that kind of thinking. Are there ways of consolidating a commitment to a particular project, or, inviting people to sing for these 4 weeks instead of asking them to do it forever? Especially with young families and children. That's a new strategy, at least for us. I'm sure others have tried that in other ways. But, I think a lot of those kinds of things need to be on our mind. Even sideways things like, do we really need to ask people to come into church for a half-hour meeting if that's one that we could do on Zoom, and then they don't have to leave their family for an hour with the travel time on either end, and they don't have to take their kids to a sitter, or that certain things can be more efficient. And I'm not suggesting that we want to go back to an all virtual world, but just for us to think about what skills did we learn, what things that we had to use during that really horrible time might benefit us even in a gooder time, in a better time.
Did you know your church website can be so much more than a static billboard? With the right changes, you can use your website to connect with people in your community and beyond. Most churches have a complicated and difficult to use website that they avoid. They're missing connections online. Fortunately, we're offering our process in an exclusive guide to help you toward a website that reaches people and gets results. And it's available for free on our website at faithgrowth.com/guide. We've seen our process work in dozens of churches to increase site traffic, spread content farther, and see their community discover them for the first time. Stop tinkering with your website and hoping people will use it. How about you take 5 minutes to look over this process and learn what it takes to make your website actually connect with people? It's all inside our free guide found at faithgrowth.com/guide. Are there opportunities you see in the digital sphere for the organ?
Well, I think absolutely. So as an example, I was growing up as a teenage organist in the 1990s. At that time, in the record store in our mall, there were maybe going to be 5 to 10 organ recordings, and that was the closest I could get unless I tuned in at 10 o'clock on Sunday night to listen to Pipe Trains.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I happened to get on the cable channel when Diane Bish was playing on The Joy of Music. Those were really the only ways I had to access organ music. Now, I can hear pretty much any organ in the world, including not so great ones, because everybody's streaming, right? But we can hear so many wonderful organists that back in my time growing up, which wasn't that long ago, we truly would have had to been in the room with in order to hear them play. I think that's an amazing opportunity. Having said that, one of the things I think is going to be a challenge for us is when we have access to so much stuff, it's going to be harder for us to discern, not to be overwhelmed, at least for somebody like me. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed by how many things I could choose from that I don't pick any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the things that might be of benefit is for people sometimes to be an intermediary to help us say, for example, how valuable this would be if every week I was on an email list where somebody sent me maybe 2 or 3 organ recordings that they found online that they were particularly excited about and had some reasons why. What was interesting about those instruments or those particular pieces or those performances. I think this also opens up our access to music by people who represent different cultures, different faith perspectives, different ethnicities, backgrounds. It gives us so much more opportunity than to what might have made it onto a commercial recording that might have happened to make it, if you see what I mean, all of the people that would have had to get in the way of our having access to that. Now it can be much more direct from one musician to another through this medium that we're speaking on today. And I think that's going to have a lot of value to making our choices for worship and concert more representational and diverse and frankly compelling, for different kinds of people, different kinds of listeners, and different kinds of performers.
Excellent. I want to circle back now to what you were saying about sort of the tools and skills that we've developed, during the height of the pandemic, that we can use now in the gooder times. And I'm wondering, were there things or strategies, tools that have changed the way that you work with your choirs now? Anything you've picked up there?
Yeah, well, one thing I can say in the singing in the in-between times, we're spread out more. And I think actually that strengthened our individual singers and it had to, that they weren't able to literally just get as much information from the person sitting that much closer to them. And I find now we're sitting further away from each other still, just space feels more comfortable too. And I think that's been of a benefit. I think there was some individual progress that was made in having so many rehearsals with people on Zoom during that year. I don't believe that those rehearsals are necessarily strong in forming a group. It's better than nothing, but you don't feel what it's like to sing together by any stretch. Sure. However, it made the individuals who are singing in their homes have access to, as they're singing with my invitation and knowing others are there, they have that comfort zone, but they actually are singing and hearing themselves in a way that they probably wouldn't when we're together. and I think there's potentially some personal growth that personal musical growth that was available in that way. So all of that's to say, yeah, I think there were some ways that those things would strengthen us, and I think there are occasions, when, for example, we might have a snowstorm. I'm not sure where you're calling from. Maybe you don't have those there, but if we were to have
we have those and hurricanes and all kinds of
okay.
stuff. Yeah.
Well, if we were to have a snowstorm here on a Wednesday night, we in the old days we would have canceled choir completely. Now there might be times, because we can send scores on as PDFs. We have which we didn't used to do. We didn't think about doing, but it's very handy for somebody who has to miss rehearsal. And we can also dial each other up on Zoom. We could have a rehearsal at home, even if it's just for a portion of our time, to touch base on something we'd hope to sing Sunday, so that people would have a little, and also we could just have a conversation. That was another thing. Every Wednesday we would spend time together, and because making music wasn't as satisfying in Zoom, we spent some time talking about things. And I think that helped the choir grow too, and it made me more mindful of how much we need to just literally hear each other's voices,
Mm-hmm.
and share things in those ways. So yeah, I think there's some possibility there, if we're willing to take it, if we're willing to hold on to it. And this has changed us by all means. I think it's made us more flexible in general too. And that is a huge benefit to those of us who work in music ministry. I think our group was in some ways very flexible to begin with, but I think this made us even more fluid of figuring out, what should we be doing in this moment, and to just allow things to happen and not hold a lot of stress about it not being exactly the way we might have hoped it was going to be. So that something good can still happen. And one thing that I say a lot, it doesn't have to be perfect to be good, and it sure doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful and heartfelt. And those are the things that we will want to draw out of people we're in communication with, whether that be in real time, in person, whether that be in having a conversation like you and I are in this way, or whether that be with somebody who happens to see a video of something we happen to do here. That there's some sort of communication that happens, and that can be very meaningful. And I think we can never know what the Spirit will do in the space between the screen and the person. We can never be the ones to judge that for someone else.
That's so wonderful. I hesitate to ask another question, but here it goes anyway. We're almost out of time. And so I do want to hear more from you, though. So I guess I just want to ask, for sort of maybe some last words of advice for church leaders, church musicians in particular, facing this moment and that anxiety and uncertainty right now. Yeah.
Well, one thing I would say is trust the things that you do know. We know that for centuries, God has been faithful to us, even when we haven't been sure what we should do next. That's what we sing a lot about. That's what we ask people to sing a lot about with us. Trust that. I think I would say we shouldn't hold on too hard to things we used to do just because we're afraid of what it might mean to see what a new possibility might be. And that doesn't mean to throw away the good things and the values that we always had. But I think we could all agree there may be a new way for those values to be experienced, as we're more aware of the things that maybe we now do have, or that we don't have as much of as we used to. And if our calling is to be servants, servant musicians, that we're part of becoming an instrument for this message of faith to be communicated. we have to be sure that when we evaluate ourselves and we listen to what others might say to us or about us, that we hold strong in that purpose and in that mission. And, we don't get lost in sweating the small stuff. That chasing all of those sideways things can take a lot of our energy and intensity away from the reason why we started to do this to begin with. And I just encourage you all to take a deep breath, and every day to take at least a moment to do something you absolutely love to do, and to figure out how you can help someone else experience that as you're doing whatever it is that you're going about doing. I've tried to hide them from you, but I've just got stuff all over my office trying to, and the reason I need to do all this work is because I believe in what this work can do for others. And I think if we stay focused on that, we'll find a way. Look at what we just did. Look at how we kept rolling and figuring out and working together. We can do it again, day after day after day. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. And thank you, Tom. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. Tom, where do you want to be found online?
Oh, well, I think a wonderful place to go if for music and inspiration would be to the First-Plymouth YouTube channel. And I hope you'll find your way there, of course. And if anybody would want to reach me, I'm really hard not to find. So my email is just my name @gmail.com. And I'd love for anyone to be in touch there if I can ever be helpful. We hear from people all over the world, actually, who stumble upon our videos to ask questions about the resources or the way that we do certain kinds of things. And so I'm happy to be a resource in that way for anyone if we can be helpful.
Oh, thank you. Thanks again. Thank you for that wonderful offer and being so generous with your wisdom today and your ministry to us all, actually. But and thank you, everybody, for listening. We want to invite you to join us in our private Facebook group, How We Do Digital Ministry. That link will be in the show notes along with the resources Tom just mentioned. But that Facebook group is a good place to connect with colleagues and discuss all things digital ministry. Thank you again. Until next week, peace and blessings to you all.